What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today I would like to discuss everybody's favorite rat ninja. Although he's not a ninja anymore, he is now a rat shaman, and that is Nashi Moon's Legacy. So this is a new Nashi, who's a character that we all kind of, I don't know about fell in love with, but we all kind of gained. Some people fell. I'm sure. I don't know. I like him. I like him a lot. Nashi is a really cool. Is a cool dude. So, but in any event, Nashi Moon's Legacy. In the past, Nashi was a mono black ninja that was capable of like free casting using your life points, which is kind of a weird. Like, the character is presented as kind of this innocent childlike figure who was adopted by Tamio. So the fact that it was like a wreck your face, spend your life to free cast stuff ninja previously, like mechanically doesn't really align with the character, at least in my opinion, or at least not what I know about him at this point. Maybe I missed something somewhere along the way, but this depiction of him on cardboard, I think, is much closer to the character that we know, and I dig it. So, Nashi Moon's Legacy. This is a 3/4 rat shaman for black, green, blue. So commander players, this is a legendary creature in 3 colors. I hope you're paying attention. Rat shaman with menace and ward 1. Whenever Nashi Moon's Legacy attacks, exile up to 1 target legendary or rat card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. You still have to pay the cost for it, so be aware of that. You don't just free spend it, but still, on a 3-drop, you get a 3/4 Menace Ward 1 creature, which is great, and it now allows you to recur any legendary card from your graveyard or rats. So if you're doing rat-themed shenanigans, cool, you can, you know, leverage this in that case to really recur all your rats. And so when you have things like burglar rats or chittering rats that you want to recur to be able to get multiple like ETB triggers and flood the board with rats that you may care about, well, all of a sudden Moon's Legacy here does that very, very well and can be a commander to those decks and give you access to green and blue for other, you know, kind of synergy pieces, you know, your kindred discoveries and whatnot that maybe you want to lean into to really take this to the next level. Whereas in the past, most rat decks have been just mono black. And which is also funny because we've seen a number of rat commanders as of late. I know Maronar, who like had a monopoly on the rat game for like a decade plus, is feeling a little left out right now because like even just in Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One, the buy a box promo was like Carumonix, I think is it, or Carumonix, whatever the name is. It's a freaking like toxic rat lord as the buy a box promo. Like that card is everywhere, even in the promotional like art. So it's funny that like rats have become such a heavily supported tribe in Magic. I find that kind of wild, but here we are, and we have yet another rat that does synergize with rats in a meaningful way, albeit a very different way than we've seen it in the past. So I like that. This ability of exiling cards out of your graveyard and then casting copies of them, I think is really clever because it gives you the effect of just playing the card again. However, what you end up with is a token copy of whatever it was, and that token copy doesn't stick around in your graveyard for later. So as a result, this cuts off the possibility of doing any infinite loops with it, which you get with other recursion effects. Like if this just took a rat and you could just play it again, you could do something like, well, so Chittering Rats was an example that I just mentioned. Chittering Rats was a 3-drop from OG Mirrodin. I think it was Darksteel. It was one of those. In the original Mirrodin Black. That I believe it was a 2/2. When it entered the battlefield, an opponent took a card from their hand and put it on top of their library. Now, that was especially devastating if your opponent didn't have effects that drew them additional cards, because the card they draw next turn is whatever they just had in their hand. And if you can get multiple triggers of that, if you can recur it in multiple ways, you can just bury your opponent's cards to the point where they're drawing 3 or 4 cards on their turn, or drawing 3 or 4 cards turn over turn, and they're all cards they've already seen before that weren't helping previously. And so that's a way of locking somebody out of the game effectively in a very powerful, nasty way. If you can do infinite graveyard recursions, like if this allowed you to just pull any rat onto the battlefield from your graveyard, even if you had to pay the cost, then you could then sacrifice the Chittering Rat to something and then attack with Nashi, bring it back. You know, you'd be able to do that turn over turn over turn. Instead, given the way that they templated this, given the way they worded it, you're creating a token copy of that Chittering Rats. So you get the effect a second time, but then you're done. You got to move on to the next thing that you're trying to bring back with this. So I like that. I think that's cool. I also really like that Nashi has an attack trigger, but it has Menace. I think that's actually a really cool scenario because Menace allows you to attack and it makes it more difficult for your opponent to block. It's not impossible for your opponent to block and deal with it, but it puts them in a situation where even if they have 2 creatures on board, if they want one of them to survive, they may not want to put them in front of Nashi here because they'd have to make a trade perhaps in a scenario that would otherwise not be that. So Menace puts your opponent in some interesting situations, and I like that. I think it's a really clever mechanic, and I love this effect because when you have a creature that has an attack trigger but it has no form of evasion, then what ends up happening is you attack with it, you get whatever the trigger is once, then your opponent blocks the thing and it's dead. You know, like that happens a lot. And like a 3/4 for 3 is decent stats. Like the fact that this thing has 4 toughness is no joke. So even if your opponent does have to gang block it, you know, because of Menace, they still have to be able to deal 4 damage across those 2 creatures. So there are some decks that are going to struggle with making that reasonable. And to be honest, if I attack with Nashi and I get something out of my graveyard, like something decent, and I get to recast it, so I'm not spending cards out of my hand that turn and I'm still advancing my board state. But if my opponent blocks it with like 4 1/1s and I take 3 of them out on the way, all right, that's not a bad trade. All in all, I got to take the card from my graveyard, bring it out into the field. I do lose Nashi in that case, who, you know, would maybe go to my command zone or stick in the graveyard. And then I still have all my cards in hand still because I didn't spend any of them. And I don't know, like, and you took out 3 of your opponent's creatures. That's not a bad setup. So this is an interesting kind of build around. You can build combat tricks because Nashi is going to find themselves in combat as the attacker a lot. Like it's just going to happen by virtue of what you're trying to do with this card. And as long as you're recurring decent creatures, you're not mad at this scenario. The ability to also like churn away big creatures that maybe you're trying to reanimate, but actually that's another thing. It's not uncommon to find yourself in situations where in, you know, like a reanimator style deck where you have gigantic creatures, you have big 6 and 7 drop creatures that you're trying to pull out of your graveyard, but you run out of like reanimation spells, or your graveyard has a ton of extra stuff in it that you had to discard in order to churn through to try to find your game plan. Well, if Nashi's in the mix, all of a sudden any legendary creature in your graveyard or anything that's incidentally a rat all of a sudden becomes effectively part of your hand as long as you're willing to attack. Like, that's pretty cool. So if I have an Atraxa in my graveyard, and I have 7 mana open, but I just haven't hit my Cruelty of Gix, or a Breach the Multiverse or whatever, I just attack with Nashi and just cast Atraxa. Like, it's definitely plan B. It's not where I want to be, but it'll put an Atraxa token on the board. So, I don't know. I'm not mad. We're going to make it happen, you know? I think that's interesting. Yeah, no, the card's just cool. It's just good design. Also, I'd be remiss. The artwork is depicting something that is easily my least favorite element of Magic Story in recent memory, and that is the Tamiyo Ghost. And by the Tamiyo Ghost, if you didn't read the March of the Machine story, there was a moment where Tamiyo was killed. So she had been completed back in Kamigawa, and she was killed in Tawashi, like in a battle over top, like in the skies of Tawashi. She was killed, which, okay, she had been completed. She was fighting for the bad guys. She had to get taken down. And that could have been a very powerful, very meaningful, emotional moment. Instead, one of her bound scrolls popped open and a consciousness backup, some kind of ghostly technological embodiment of Tamiyo, like, popped out and was perfectly fine and hadn't been completed and had all of her memories and all that jazz. And so she's just here now, and Nashi has her. And you can see in the artwork that in this case, we actually see the ghostly form of Tamiyo actually touching Nashi's shoulder. And the reason that I point that out is because this is a ghost thing. This is like techno ghost. It would be very easy for said techno ghost to not have any corporeal form. And that would be meaningful for somebody who is wanting the comfort of their mother. To be able to talk with her, to be able to see her, but not be able to touch her, could have been a meaningful, deep, consequence of everything that happened. But in this case, Nashi doesn't have that. He has an image of his mother, his adoptive mother, Tamio, who is perfectly fine, and who he can hold her hand, he can hug her. That's there. There's a connection there. So it feels very much like they just undid her death and her completion with this like weird techno ghost that, as far as I know, they didn't set up in any way whatsoever. I'm disappointed by that, and that was the moment when I realized like there will be no stakes for this Phyrexian invasion whatsoever. The vast majority of characters are going to be perfectly fine, and if you were moved because of the sacrifices that characters had to make as a result of the invasion, too bad. Your feelings were invalid. You didn't actually have to grieve any of these people. And that bothers me because I did. You know, I had all those big feelings and they were all undone. So at this point, as of this recording, the March of the Machine Aftermath story has been live on the website for 2 days, and I still haven't read it. I'll get to it eventually, just so I don't look like an idiot on these episodes, but I have no desire to read it. If I wasn't trying to be a pundit, I wouldn't bother. So honestly, I'm bummed to see the I'm bummed to see the Tamio ghost in the art, just because I don't like that story beat. But Nashi's awesome. This little guy's sweet, and the idea of Nashi picking up his mother's work after her death and moving forward and changing his behavior, and that being depicted in the mechanics, like he's not some motorcycle like hooligan anymore. He's picking up the cataloging of stories and the appreciation of history that his mother stood for and carrying on her work. That's beautiful, and I really like that. So his character development is great. It's just the fact that she's still around. It's kind of like, really? Anyway, thank you so much for checking out this episode. Sorry for going on another rant about the March of the Machine story. I just can't help it. It just has gotten under my skin to an irrational level, and I would be remiss if I didn't put it out there. So anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate it very, very much. I hope you're having a phenomenal day, night, weekend, whatever it is. By the way, if you are hearing this and MagicCon Minneapolis is still a thing, definitely come find me. I will be walking around the convention center. I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the command zone. I also have some tokens that have my silly face on it that I'm going to be handing out. So come get those. Get a handshake, high five, whatever you're looking for. Hugs. I'm also down for hugs. I'm not opposed to that in any event. And if you're not at MagicCon Minneapolis, keep an eye out on my Twitter for any future events. I am starting to get more into traveling for these gigs because honestly, Magic people are good people. That's right, you listening to this right now, you're good people, and I want to spend more time with all of you. So anyway, I hope you're having a good one, and I'll catch you on the next one.